European issue. Identity crisis, what we really gotta get to. But how could I forget me? How could I forget you? They pull us apart and continue to diminish you.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am humbled to be here with Father Smalls, and I'm going to go ahead and speak on his biography, which precedes itself. He's a Pan African activist, scholar, and speaker, former adjunct professor of Africana Studies, former UMA. Is that correct? Imam, Imam of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, founded by Malcolm X, and current international vice president of the African World Diaspora Union, CEO of African American Management Company, Ghana Limited, co-owner of the Sana Lodge Hotel in Cape Coast, Ghana, founding member of current elder of the Sons of Africa, 75 years old, married for 50. Oh my, that's huge right there. Father of 8, grandfather of 23, 35 years as a priest in the Yoruba tradition, New York, USA, North America. And we are honored to have you here today. I'll let you go ahead and take over.
Okay, well, I'm honored to be here at this Black Sustainability Summit. I think it's a very important document in our history and our current politics. We saw what was happening in Nigeria over the last week. We saw what has been happening with Black Lives Matter in the streets of New York, following Brother Floyd's death and other things. So we know that the young people around the world are standing up. And I know many from this side was giving support to the young people in Nigeria. That is a sign of Pan-African consciousness. And so my topic, which is a simple one and kind of complex too, is the importance of identity. And that little word is one of the most important words of our movement, the importance of identity and Pan-African unity. And so I'm good for giving definitions. If anyone listens to my speeches, I'm big on the definitions because I think it really gets your mind where it needs to be. So my first definition, the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. When I'm talking about identity, what is identity? The fact of being who or what a person or a thing is. It's also a close similarity of affinity. They even have a mathematical definition for identity. And it expresses a transformation that leaves an object unchanged. That one is very important for us because we were transformed, moved away from our continent, denied access to all of the tools of culture and self-identification, and yet we've remained African. And a lot of times because we don't speak our language system, and we've been denied access to learning how to learn as Africans, we question whether we are Africans. I had such a phone call last night that broke my heart from a young lady in Florida who couldn't understand how she could still be African, having been here 400 years. Mathematically, it's very clear that things don't change. You are what you are, no matter where you are or how long you have been where you are. Another aspect of the definition of identity. Identity is the qualities, the belief, the personality, the looks, and or expressions that make a person or a group related to one another. That's very important because that's very close to the definition of culture. Identity is to recognize or establish as being a particular person or thing, to associate oneself in feeling, interest, action with a specific group or a specific belief. So a few years ago, I wrote what I thought was a good definition of culture. And I've seen many, but I still like mine best. So I'd like to read the definition of culture, because culture and identity is intertwined in such a way you can't separate them. Culture is the tool that gives a people their shared definition of reality, their sense of order, and maintain group integrity. Culture maintains the group's historical consciousness. Culture is the training and the development of the mind. Culture is the refinement of tasks and manners acquired by such training. Culture also involves the social spiritual structures that produce the intellectual and artistic manifestation that characterize a society. Culture is responsible for the rearing, the cultivating in a prepared manner, in a prepared medium, the next generation. Culture is indeed the means by which a people protects themselves from genocide. And this is very important because a lot of people say, oh, you know, when we were brought here in slavery, we lost our culture. Nothing could be far from the truth. If you study, people ask me, where are you from? And I said, I grew up in Africa. And they said, oh, where? I said, South Carolina. I said, wait a minute, how can you grow up in Africa and in South Carolina? Well, you see, all those people that stepped off the slave ships, they had Africa in their minds. They had Africa in their consciousness, Africa in their language, Africa in their feelings. The only thing they could build on those plantations were African families and African villages with African ideas that they learned to express in a new language. And we call that language Ebonics or Gullah or Geechee. But we took the English language, we took the African grammar structure, because they didn't teach us grammar. For nearly 400 years, they didn't even try to teach us grammar. So we took the grammar structure we brought from home and the vocabulary structure we adopted from them, and we created our own way to talk our talk to ourselves. So they didn't even know what we were talking about, even though we were speaking vocabularically their language. We call that today Ebonics, or we call it Gullah or Geechee. But it's the same concept. Most of these people in the development of the new culture lived in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And this was during the tobacco era, the rice era, and the dye they made. But when cotton hit, they moved those same families to Mississippi, to Arkansas, to Alabama, and they took this cultural transformation and innovation with them. We never lost Africa. We hid it in the Baptist church. We hid it in the AME church. We hid it in the different institutions we were allowed to have. And I'm going to dwell on this a little bit more before I look at the definition of Pan Africanism. Because sometimes we think we're doing something new and trying to reach out to Africa. No, we're doing something more today, but our ancestors never stopped reaching back. And it's important to know that piece. So when I was initiated as a Yoruba priest, excuse me, I had to be blindfolded, and I was in a hut in the bush for 7 days, fasting, going through different rituals with music and drumming being done, and teaching and having out-of-body experiences and recalling this to the priests and priestesses when I came back, having, dreams, recalling the dreams so they could write it down, so they can see what spiritual messages were there. While going through that, and I'm just giving you a tiny piece of it, I remembered when I joined St. Anne's Baptist Church on Acadia Plantation in Georgetown, South Carolina, where I grew up. And I went to a very similar ceremony at age 13, as did everyone in my village at age 13 had to do. We joined the church, but the church was the African village, you see. And 13 was being right on the African age grade system that we find all over Africa. And I went to something called the moaning bench. And we had to close our eyes and get on our knees, and we had to pray. You had 7 days, and your family stood over you, and each family in turn would sing their song and clap their rhythm for their child to bring them up. They call it getting the Holy Ghost, but in the Yoruba tradition, we call it getting possessed. But if you don't study the history, you can't make the relationship. You can't do the equation. And so that ceremony I went through in the Yoruba shrine, I'd already gone through it in the Baptist church at 13, not knowing what it was. Okay. Now, my grandma was a root woman. I mean, today I know she was an indigenous priestess. But then we were made to be ashamed of the fact that she was the root woman, even though everybody, black and white in that community, when they got sick and European medicine didn't help, came running to my mama through that back door on any given night so she could work her little African magic. And all through the villages of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, we maintain the indigenous priestcraft. The most famous is called Dr. Buzzard. People like to make joke about this man called Dr. Buzzard, but he was one of the most famous indigenous African priests in North America. And every village, and still to this day, if you go down south, you know where to find the root woman if you whisper to the right person. You know where to find the root man if you whisper to the right person. And then we said we lost our culture. No, we didn't. We brought it in our heads and we innovated on it, you know, and we created these new kind of jazz with it. And in fact, the whole concept of jazz has to do with African innovation and transformation of our culture in a new traditional space. And so that's why in every generation, you see a move towards going back to Africa. A lot of times we like to think of it as having started with the UNIA and the Garvey movement. But no, it didn't. Alexander Cromwell, Martin Delany, before had gone to Africa, got land to take all of us back home before the Civil War. Liberia, they say, oh, the white man started that to create a colony. That may have been his mind, but those black men and women who sold their chickens and their cows and the little land they had, because this wasn't the enslaved African population, this was the free African population who had gotten out of slavery, who went back and built Sierra Leone and built Liberia. And now people want to play with history, so that gets wiped out of our memories. You can't do that. That's Pan Africanism in its fullest. You can't take away that we never gave up wanting to go back home, that we actually went home and built 2 nation states. Yes, there were conflict and cultural contradictions and colonial interference and all of those things that have created trauma for us over the centuries. But we did those things, you know? And then we look, and I'll take a look at Pan Africanism, and you'll see how close we've always been to Pan Africanism throughout our experience in this country. And when we think of Pan Africanism, we think of the modern Pan Africanism, again, starting with W.B. Du Bois and so forth. But one of the best and finest Pan Africanists was Booker Teleferry of Washington. No one thinks of Booker Washington as a Pan Africanist. I grew up on Booker Washington because I'm from South Carolina, you know? And Booker Washington was our great hero. Most people today don't know the history of Mr. Booker T. Washington. And you need to study that history. When W. Du Bois went to England to set up that conference, he was accompanied by Mr. Booker Teleferry of Washington, who paid for the trip. When they came back and promote the conference, it was Booker T. Washington, massive communication networks and newspaper that promoted that Pan-African conference. Because he didn't go there and speak, people criticized him as being non-involved. But history will tell you he was extraordinarily involved. And so when we get the Honorable Messiah, Marcus Garvey, coming to America. He came at the invitation of Booker Teleferia Washington. And they had hoped to meet and work together. But unfortunately, Booker died a few months before he got here, and I contend he might have been murdered. And as Tony Martin has written, and this is one of the greatest scholars writing about the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Tony Martin wrote that Dr. Garvey said that he had come to America to implement the Tuskegee model. That became the foundation of UNIA. So these men were Pan-Africanists. No matter what the white left has tried to do in interpreting our history, Dr. Nobles have taught us you must study your own history from your own people. And when you learn your history, you can erase the white man's mystery and work your Black miracles. And so that becomes a very important position for us to take. And that's why one of our great fathers, Dr. John Henry Clark, said, he said, history tells you where you've been in order to tell you where you are, so you can estimate where you still have to go. And a lot of times we think history is trivial, but history is really the efforts and experiences of your ancestors to try to free the world they want you to live in. And so we must take it as being very important. But let's just kind of roll over the definition, because I like to do definition. That's just one of my little weakness thing. And I've been doing it in almost every speech I've ever made on what is Pan-African unity. Pan-Africanism is a worldwide movement. Contrary to what people like to say, Pan-Africanism had died. It hasn't died. I'm sitting here, you're sitting here, you're working in Africa, I'm working in Africa, I have business in Africa, I have business in America, I have land in America, and family in America, and I have adopted children in Africa. So we're still trying to carry out the Pan-African ideals. Some of us are doing it as individuals, and many of us are doing it as members of organizations like WADU, the Worldwide African Diasporan Union, and other formations that we work with. So when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we're talking about a worldwide movement that aims to organize, encourage, and strengthen the bonds of solidarity between all indigenous and diasporan ethnic African groups around the world. And we're doing this based on a common goal dating back to the Atlantic slave trade. If you came from Cuba, like I practice the Yoruba spiritual tradition. If you came out of Cuba practicing that tradition, they would say you're practicing lukomi. Lukomi is a Yoruba word that means you belong to me and I belong to you. And when there was no Nigeria then, so these kind of boundaries we have today didn't exist. And Yoruba community lived in multiple spaces on the continent, but they could recognize each other by their scarations and family markings. So when they found themselves in the slave dungeons and on the slave ships, they said, look at me, you belong to me, I belong to you. You understand? We never stopped being who we were. Never. We are the consummate African. The ancestors took us from every corner of that continent, squeezed us like an orange and merged us into this one Africa. I know from my mitochondrial DNA shows that I'm 100% Mindi. On my papa's side, I'm from Cameroon a little bit, from Nigeria a little bit, from Ghana a little bit. I got a little Congo and Angola, you know. They've all merged into this person. So Pan-Africanism, even before it becomes a political ideology, it is our genetic ideology. It is our genetic markers. And you can't get away from it even if you kill yourself. You know what I'm saying? So the energy that you've created goes back into the universe as the consummate African. So Pan-Africanism is a must as a trend for us to push. Like the work that this organization, the Black Sustainability Organization, is doing in Africa. You ain't doing nothing but going to see about your mama, see about your daddy, see about your cousin, see about your sister. When we were put on those ships, our uncle was left standing there. Our cousin was left standing there. You know, our granny was left there. That same DNA that was on the slave ship was being created multiple times on the mainland. How could you have left? In the Yoruba tradition, they got a concept. Now I'll come back to Pan Africanism, and know how to give me my time, brother, because these things go very fast. It's called alowo, and it means like we go and we come. It's a concept of what we call in the West reincarnation. In our tradition, and all of our cultures have this concept that we leave the realm of the divine, which we call the totality of creation, the every and all things at once. And we leave it a specific destiny. We got a specific job to come down here and do, to perfect divinity, okay? Each one of us, if you go and look at any African language and look at the word for people, person, place, or thing, you'll see either in the prefix or the suffix their word for God, their word for the divinity, which tells you Africa see God as one whole, and that everything has God in it. And then we may emanate, but we start as a whole. Europe see things in fragments and pieces, and they're trying to figure out how to make it a whole. That's why we're having the conflicts when we take on their ideas, you see. So in the Aloha tradition, one is born into this world with their destiny. And you've got 8 times to come and go, and 12 profound steps you must develop and pass in order to go back and not come back here again. But when you go and come, you don't come back as a bird or a tree or a fish or a snake. You come back as a human being, and they say in the same ibi, the same family that you were originally born in. And we know in the Caribbean and North America, anytime a baby is born, what is the first thing they ask? Who just had to come back now? Who just come back? Who this child? Is this mass so-and-so, past so-and-so, nana so-and-so, uncle so-and-so? We never lost it. We just had a different way of expressing it. But we are in a culture that constantly tells us we've lost it. No, we haven't. We are the Africans. Someone said, oh, brother Small, look how light-skinned you are. You're all brown. Browns ain't nothing but shades of black. Black is the source of all things, and everything is a shade thereof. And so Pan-Africanism isn't just a political concept. It is a worldview, a thought pattern, a genetic construct, a cultural construct, an economic construct, a social construct. And when we look at it in all these spaces, we'll learn to start easily being the Pan-Africanist without having to try and qualify or identify ourselves for anybody. We don't have to justify loving your mama. Some people say, oh, well, you shouldn't be romanticizing Africans so much. If you love someone, what's the first thing you do? You romanticize them. You have a romance with them. How you cannot have a romance with what you love? So we have to make sure that we begin to state. So I'm going to wrap this up real quick. Pan-African unity is predicated, as I said, on economic, politics, and culture. Okay. Economic, politics, and culture, and race identity. And so I'm going to close my little statement with this one little speech. It's a little ditty by Dr. Asa Hilliard, our ancestor. Listen to this very closely, because Pan-Africanism and identity and freedom is wrapped in the same package. If you don't know your identity, and given our situation in the world and you're not an African, you're not going to learn freedom. So listen to what Baba Asa had to say for us. He said, our first mistake was that we thought of freedom as a place rather than as a continuation of a struggle. Our second mistake was that we thought of freedom as a goal rather than as a launching pad from which to reach our goal. Without purpose, freedom hardly matters. Our third mistake was that we thought that freedom made us free. That, however, is license, not freedom at all. And then he concludes with this one line that I hope you embed in your souls. He said, freedom is being shackled to your identity, purpose, and direction, and being in constant pursuit. Thank you very much.
Yo, Baba. Moop, moop, moop.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yo.
Oh, so powerful, powerful words, powerful
Yeah.
words. I guess we're gonna open it up for questions now. If anyone has questions, feel free to type them into the Hoover app. We have a question here. It's saying, what can we do as Africans born in America about the killing of root women in West Africa today?
The first thing we have to do is stand up for our indigenous spiritual culture. You cannot separate yourself from your indigenous structure. That's what makes you. The priests and priestesses that have stood the test of time, fought against colonialism, fought against Islam, fought against European Christianity, to keep these systems together, we have an obligation to protect them. I was trained and raised by one of the most beautiful women in Ghana. Her name is Nana Puasa Afriye. She died 4 years ago this coming April on her 100th, right after her 100th birthday. And I was happy that I spent her last big Akwesida with her. And she had been taught and raised by the Motias. You know, people think the Motias are mythical little people, but the Motias are real. They're little people, but they're very real. I've danced with them. I've eaten with them. I've prayed with them. What we've got to do is not be afraid to learn to love the way of our ancestors again. Learn to love the way of our ancestors. Let me tell you, as a part of the answer to that question, that would be the motivation for the protection of the indigenous spiritual leaders on the continent and here in the Western Hemisphere, where we're under attack in Haiti. We're under attack right here in New York. You have to be a root lady or man in New York, got to almost hide yourself, you know? In Haiti to practice voodoo, even in Haiti, you're not safe anymore. But we've got to remember this one thing. The divine did not drop babies from the sky. The babies did not grow up out of the ground. And no stork came swooping through the window with the basket. Those babies came out of the womb of a woman. In Yoruba, that's called Obatala. If Obata is the one that creates the forms that is human, then you're talking about the womb of a woman. And that baby in the womb of that woman came from an intercourse sex between a male and a female, an egg and a seed, finding union. Total Pan Africanism there. But what's beautiful about that is two things, and then I'll end the answer. One is that the parents of that baby were simply recreating themselves. They recreated themselves as their baby, as that has been done from the first time the universe manifested as a Black woman. If you understand that, then you see you are your ancestors. You are your ancestors evolving through time and eternity. And that woman and the man who put the seed there, they are that aspect of God that creates. That's African culture right there. With an understanding of our culture, we can be motivated to save our system so we can teach it to our children.
Okay, we have another question coming in.
I just want to
Thank
thank
you so much for your insightful answers too. Let me not skip over the knowledge that you're giving us. I'm just trying to squeeze in all
Yes,
of these
sir.
questions that
Yes, sir.
Someone's asking, can you talk a little bit more about the similarities between possession and catching the spirit in the Black church? How has this protected our people during our enslavement? Thank you.
Right. Because many times when we go into the state of the transform place, or the place where we leave our bodies and go visit other spaces in the universe, now they got all kinds of name for it, out of body experience, this, and all of these things. But that was one where we got information from the ancestral world, from the divine world, and instructions. And it was usually coming through elder members of the church, most of the time elder women of the church, who would be the ones that would go into these trance. They would go into the dances. We call it shouting, but then I would learn later, those were the ethnic dance step they brought from the very villages they were in Africa. You know, and I go like, oh my God. That's when I realized we never left home. And so when we go into trances, let me give you one experience. Even though some priests, I am a priest and I'm an elder priest, and I do have restrictions, but I do have obligations. On one occasion, when I was in a trance, I went to a place. I literally died for almost 13 minutes, which is a very long time to be clinically dead and come back and not be mentally screwed up. But some people say I'm mentally screwed up, right? So I went to a place like a big stadium. And in this place, there was ancestors from, and wearing the symbols of all of our ancestors. And I was surprised to see even Native American ones there, but all of Africa. And then I was told by whoever was taking care of me, give you a report. And I'm sitting there like, what kind of report? What am I even doing in this place, right? And I had papers and I gave a report. And then they gave me a message. And the message was, go back and tell our children, we will win. That's like 40 something years ago that I had that experience. And I remember when I came back to Babaluaye, or Shakpana, depending which name y'all know that, Orisha, who was possessing my mother, and my head was laying between the breasts of this woman. And imagine coming out of this trance and there's two breasts there. I don't know whether I've died or whether I'm a baby again, I don't know. And somebody's anointing and washing this foot and this arm, and you sitting there halfway in the world and halfway out of the world. And you see Shakpana dancing and moving and the rhythm and the drums playing. And he's saying, I told y'all this is my son. And I can take him away and I can bring him back. And when I told you to make the medicine, you didn't make it, but I made the medicine train myself. And they were putting the medicine in my head. Now, some of this priests don't usually tell, but I have taken the prerogative and I've spoken to my elders and I've gotten permission to tell some of this because we need to know. That was the only time they took me away. Once they took me off of the floor, and people think like Small is really tripping, like he's orbiting. But anybody know me, I'm a cold-blooded street revolutionary. I've been in this thing all of my life. I've been in the politics, continental-wide, all of my life. But when I first stepped into the spiritual realm, I realized that so much of the work that we were doing wasn't even touching how we had to save and restore our people. When they took me from my shrine, my ancestral shrine, I was sleeping one night in New York, to Kemet and brought me back twice in one night. The first time I almost died. I almost had a heart attack. I ran out of breath to jump up, screaming, hollering. The whole family came running upstairs. I didn't know how to tell them that I was in Egypt because they thought I was really crazy for real. And then they told me to move the shrine, which I proceeded to do that night and put it in a different location. Laid on the mat again, and this time they took me, but someone who was carrying me had their arms under my armpit, and I wasn't afraid that time. And I know this is like, Small, you going out there. I live out there, you know? And I've been able to keep this demon at bay in my political life because these ancestors roll with me. See, we're looking for ancestors outside of ourselves. No, they all live in your DNA. When we pour the libation and we look at the pictures on the shrine and we light the candle, that is the reminder and the stimulation to wake up the living elements of them within you. And so when we go into these trance states, many times it's communicating with them. And it's usually someone who's clean and pure in the community who they can bring in that energy space and send back without causing them harm to their lives. And they bring messages back to us. And people laugh at this from other cultures, but you go and look at the Japanese Shinto culture, it mirrors our culture. You look at the Buddhist culture, it mirrors our culture. You walk in the Catholic Church, they got more statues and candles than any voodoo chamber has. But then they tell you not to do it, not to appeal to your ancestors. Because when we move, and I move with them, people who know me know, when you see me, you see a whole bunch of folks rolling with me. If you don't see them visually, you feel them and you know their presence, you know? And so culture is deeper than people say. Dancing, drumming, music, singing, theater, these are tools of culture. These are the tools that teaches us the ideas, the concepts, and the principles that undergirts the worldview that is culture. But our culture is our esoteric and historic knowledge of cosmology and ecology and our relationship between the two. And that's what they want to smash. You can't rule the world unless you smash the African culture. You know, and we're not going to let them, they haven't really been ruling the world. They've been dominating aspects of the world. We're going to even take that away from them. And we don't have to do it with a gun, because we're not them. We need to do it with African unity. You know, we need to do it with African unity. Yes, weapons may be one of the tools you use to protect yourself in self-defense. But it is the unity that tells you how to carry out the utilization of a tool that is effective in your behalf.
That is a great segue into the next question. That
Yes.
I have myself, I guess I'm gonna take privilege as the moderator. And I wanted to know, how do you feel that we can use technology to leverage the Pan-African movement? You know, with movements like, you know, the Greenwood Bank, with fintech, blockchain, things of this nature, i.e. what's going on right now. We're using technology to come together, like-minded people. How do you feel we can truly leverage this, you know, from your wise perspective? What do you feel is the best way for us to effectively use technology to leverage the Pan-African movement?
Let's talk about technology not like it is something strained or remote. Technology has been with us from the beginning of time. The first time we made a tool to cut something with, that was technology. The first time we made a boat out of reeds, that was technology. The first time we built a fire, that was technology. The first time we decided to cook our food at the time, hoping for better health, that was technology. So we must use every and all technical tool that's available. Every and all technical tool and technical concepts and ideas that's available to advance what we are trying to do. And remember, what we're trying to do is very fundamental. We're trying to make sure that we and our offsprings can provide the food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security necessary for living an optimal life. Okay? That's the basic, and that's the real. How do we do that is where the things get sticky. And that's why I would say history helps erase your enemy's mystery, so you can have some clarity on how you deal with conflict resolution in the world, using your own methodology, your own worldview, your own concept, ideas, and principles of justice, fairness, and honesty. And that's why history and culture is so essential to developing the Pan-African movement, to build the kind of Africa that we want to see for our children and our grandchildren, wherever we are in the world. We know that 80 million people are not going to leave the United States and move back to Africa. But let them at least know there are Africans here, and they got a connection with the Africans there. Let the brother in Jamaica, if he takes the plane from Jamaica and comes to New York, he doesn't come as an alien, an immigrant, and a stranger. He has left one space in Africa to reside in another space in Africa. That comes from understanding not only how to use technology, but how to use technology to explain yourself to yourself. what we're doing today, we're using the highest of today's technology and communications. They didn't thought it would get to this, but we done got out of hand with this stuff, you know what I'm saying? And we've got to use it to the max. We've got to use the technology and energy, solar energy, wind energy, water energy, the kinds of technology necessary to build and find aquifers in the grounds in Africa, to get good, clean, fresh water to people. The kind of technology that shows us how to preserve, if we live up in the northern areas where you're raising sheep and cows and goats, how do we preserve that meat without poisoning ourselves with his chemicals, so that we can share the proteins necessary to keep the body healthy to do the next thing. This is about not losing sight of the most fundamental and basic motivation for human existence, which is food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security, which demands that you get control of the economics, politics, and culture where you live. And that's when we come to the Bitcoins and all of the other new electronic way of money these days. We need to learn it. We need to master it. We need to use them.
Thank you so much. I am a blockchain enthusiast. It feels good to hear that from the elder, to know that I'm on the right path of what I'm trying to do when I tell people to get into the digital assets. We have another question here. Someone is saying that they would like to erase their Christian identity and be a priestess, or priestess or priest. I guess this is a woman, so she's saying priestess, but you're a priest, such as yourself. What would she need to do to reach that goal and teach, herself culture and true spiritual identity? Is it a curriculum, a guide, somewhere she can travel, books, etc.?
Okay. Well, it's difficult to do it today, but I will share with the sustainability group at least a 10-book bibliography on the subject after the conference is over. And is there a way for them to reach you and get this kind of information? Christianity, let me just give you a quick spiel. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all fragments from the periphery of the African sacred science system. It's just that the enemy have used it wrongly because he doesn't understand what he stole. And he doesn't have the capacity to contain spirit. So he can't go past intellect and soul. And so he then limits you from your spiritual development because he cannot enter the realm of spiritual development. So it starts with studying the history of the church. And the church started in Africa by Black people. Matter of fact, 7 of the 10 people at the Nicene Conference in Rome that began the process of writing the Bible were Black men. But their intent was not this criminal operation we see today, causing Christianity. They were attempting to use African wisdom to transform the barbarian that had just defeated them militarily. Of course, we've suffered because of that. But study the church in Ethiopia, study the Coptic church in Africa, study the Byzantine Empire, and you found that Christianity existed in Africa for 1,000 years before the Catholic Church was born. And it'd be 500 years after that before the Protestant churches of Europe was born. But someone has taken your spiritual concepts and ideas, which you can see demonstrated very clearly in the wisdom of ancient Egypt and Kemet, are yours, and they misdirected, misused it, mischaracterized it. They took out literature, took out pieces they wanted to take out, and left in things that they clearly didn't understand. And I'll end that question with just one thing, because this is so important in Christianity. Jesus, Mary, Joseph. That's Osiris, Aset, and Haru. Plain as day. It didn't symbolize 3 gods and goddesses. It symbolized the symbol of God as the family. The family is the African symbol for God, because only in the family can recreation take place in the womb of that woman, who's not something separate from God, but that aspect of God that creates. That's what we were trying to explain, the function of the universe to ourselves. We were trying to explain the function of nature to ourselves and the function of the human body as it moved about in nature and cosmology and what that relationship should be. That's what our spiritual system is about. It should be called the African Sacred Science System. So I hope that's helpful.
So below. Someone is asking, how do we make sure the connection between spirituality and sustainability is recognized and used as a guiding principle?
Well, you know, the big struggle, the hard struggle is to do your due diligence. Don't go join a group simply because you see a group. The same investigation you need to do before you become a part of anything. Do that same due diligence investigation. Know, who are these people? You want to see their resume. What is the kind of work that you've been doing? I want to talk to some of the other people who are members of the organization. What is your literature? Let me examine your literature and compare it to things I know. There's an enormous body of literature in the bookstores of the world, and especially here in North America, on the subject of African spiritual system, African religions, et cetera, et cetera. Do the due diligence of reading and studying before you join anything. The key thing to know is to get rid of the fear that there's a God outside of you that's going to hurt you if you don't do what some preacher or some priest or some other crazy person tells you to do. What African tradition will tell you is that you are an expression of an aspect of the divine essence having the human experience that makes you equal to all other things in the universe. Nobody. As a priest, I'm your servant. I'm not somebody for you to look up to. I'm your servant. And the more body knowledge you have and the more wisdom you have, the greater servant you should be to those who don't have it, because then what is the worth of having it? It has no value.
Wow. Let's see here. Man, I'm getting filled up over here trying to not get starstruck with all this information while asking these questions. Because you such powerful words. Everything you're saying is so powerful.
And while you're pulling up the next question, Costco, I did want to ask others to unmute their, not unmute, excuse me, to at least turn on their videos. There's so many people in this place and space. And I know I'm over here just saying, I'm snapping while you're going, Baba. You can't hear me, but you know, we're over here with these videos. I'm just like, let's see some other faces. I know I'm not the only one in this spot just filled up with this information. There we go. Look at all these beautiful African faces. Look at this. Can you see them? If you switch over from speaker view to grid view to gallery view up at the top right-hand corner, you should see gallery view. And you'll be able to see everyone's faces.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
I'm Black people.
Yeah, they're here. We all tuned in. Yes.
No, this thing of Pan Africanism is powerful. Let me tell you a place we need to start it, because of a conversation I had with a young lady last night. When we see the Moorish community in America, the Hebrew community in America, the Black Christian community in America, the Muslim community in America, all fighting, but I'm the one. That's where the Pan-African struggle needs to start over here. Mm-hmm. If we can create Pan-African fusion, because every one of those organizations, if you look at history, that's why history will erase the mystery. They all had a common source. Okay, they all have a common source, and that source is Africa. Yes. Whether they got it through Egypt, whether they got it through Freemasonry, because Freemasonry comes right up out of Kemet. I do a whole lecture on that. You know, Africa, mother of Mason. And so when we begin to understand that if we're going to make Pan-Africanism work worldwide, we're going to have to begin to do it on the local level. The Moorish brothers and sisters who represent a population in our history at a particular time of extraordinary historical experience in North Africa, they're real. That happened. But they're just Africans being called Moors. The Hebrew brothers and sisters who was in Northeast Africa after the Hyksos and the Hittite invasion and 400 years of those people enslaving them and the conflicts that follow, they're still Black folks. They weren't the Zulu or the Ndebele or the Shona. They were living someplace else. Being Black didn't even know our Hebrew brothers was having a conflict. But let's not make our conflict in history and time, when we came into the body of wisdom of understanding on how to be African, the only thing. Let's find diffusion at the source. Let's study history. Let's go back to Congo. Let's go back to Zimbabwe. Let's go back for all of us who are into Kemet. Kemet is magnificent and beautiful, but the oldest symbol of an Ankh and Ra is about 50,000 years earlier in the volcanic rock of South Africa. That changes the whole Kemet story. You know what I'm saying? So let's study our history. Let's study the future of our people, and we'll heal ourselves.
Yes, Baba Small.
Yes, Sister
Vivian Stewart. I agree. Sometimes, as an activist, people have asked me, "Well, what community are you from?" And I'll tell them, wherever my people of African descent is, that is my community.
Absolutely.
And so here in Charlotte, the family is the Nation of Islam. I'll go to the mosque. I love them. And at 72, I go to the mosque. I'll go to church, and I'll also go to the service at the Moorish Science Government. They're in my science fairs. These are your family. I don't separate because they're all people of African descent.
Yeah.
You know, so I love that. We don't separate.
No, and that's how we began to make Pan Africanism palatable to others around the world.
Yes.
You see? And it's incumbent on the leadership. When I was younger, I was fighting all the sides. You know, I was a Muslim imam when I was 21 years old. You know, the Nation of Islam and me, we were fundamental enemies. Some of the sweetest brothers and comrades I have today are members of the Nation of Islam. I had some problem in my family down in Virginia. I couldn't get down there to see about my child. I called Brother Minister Joseph, and he went and see about my child, you see. So we have to understand this question of Africanism and Pan-Africanism and identity is a sacred question. Yes. Because at the end of the day, we are God having the human experience in each of our peculiar, ray. And like if we make God the great light, each of one of us is one of the rays from the great light. And yet we contain the totality of the great light, which is the space that tells us how we're united. And so we have different experiences in history and time and space. But let's not define ourselves by the experiences, but define ourselves by the essence out of which we came to have these experiences.
Thank you. And there was a question. The question I have is just like cryptocurrency, which I've studied also, and I do have some cryptocurrency. How do you feel about, because I felt that is important for our people to know, and so whatever I learn, I also share. How do you feel also that our people have gotten away from possibly bartering? And I do believe in bartering when, you know, so how do you feel about that as a form of money?
Oh, I think it's necessary. You know, I think economic literacy is one of the most important things we can do right now. And this world is going to be moving towards cryptocurrency much faster than you think. They're going to go back. White folks are buying up all the gold and silver they can right now to back that currency, okay? And we're going to be left in the dark if we don't begin to make the shift to educate ourselves economically on these new trends and these new kinds of tools that is going to be used in the economic world.
Thank you.
You're welcome, my sister.
I saw some other questions come up from others that were there. I think some people were trying to unmute. Costco, I don't know if you can see them. I know it's a lot of people in here.
I just wanted to say, my name is Janina, and I just wanted to say that I am a Muslim, and I know that there was past rift between the Muslims, when the Muslims and the Nation of Islam, but in all honesty, today there is not that rift. You know, we are all one. We are all we're brothers and sisters, and we communicate with each other. So I don't think that what you found then is so now. And then it may be in some particular communities, but that's not the way it should be.
Oh no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I worked with Khalid and others, and we led the movement. I remember the first time I met and embraced Minister Farrakhan, and we put out one, and we fought for decades to erase that kind of disunity. Some of the closest comrades I have in this country today are brothers, both in the Orthodox community, both in the Nation of Islam. And I speak in all of these communities. I go in with all my beads and everything. I don't know if they let everybody come up in there, but no, I agree with you 100%. And I think much of it has been erased. I wish more of it could be erased, because one of the great leaders that we really miss, we miss the wisdom of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which is a body wisdom, which is essential in our growth process. And we've kind of left that pot side the road. You know, how to eat to live. That was out long before people started talking about vegan this and vegetarian this. Message to the Black man. And
Seems like you threw out the baby with the water, right?
You know, because we didn't know. We had an enemy fighting our minds. But now when we began to study our history, we began to heal our minds. See, and that's why history is so important. You know, when you begin to learn your history, you begin to go into a healing process and a rebirthing process. And it is that rebirthing process that is so essential to go through. But you've got to know the way of your ancestors. You've got to study your history to get there.
Yes, you're so right.
I have to ask something, if I can ask a question. You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to know, from your experience, how were you able to get brothers from different backgrounds to work as a cohesive unit? You know, because I work with so many different people of African descent from all over the world, and we'll be all working in the same area. But what was the most successful way to get everyone to come together in the way that you're speaking of?
Well, you know, you and I have talked, Brother Drake. I'm glad to see your face.
Glad to see you too.
Like some of the work that you've been doing, right? Because it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen in one step. But you've learned a lot of methods that's worked. You've gathered a lot of tools that's worked. You have to simply be willing to share that with other people, you know? And I usually encourage people to form study groups, you know? People can form study groups in their household and their family. Just set aside 2 hours a week. I'm going to set aside to devote just to learning about Africa. 2 hours a week. For brothers like what you're doing with tracing our genealogy and our lineage, having done it with yours so successfully, instead of people paying thousands of dollars out to all these little think tank things, you can come up with a methodology that will show people how to find their way back home, given the blessing that you've been given. Publish a pamphlet or put it on DVD or however you can get that information forward. Always with the central idea being about unity, we're one. And that's why I got so deep into this whole thing about spirituality. Because let's look at it now, and all of us in the different religious things, if God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent, and supreme, then there's no room for nothing else to exist but it. Then what are we? The only thing we can be is aspect of that one existence. And there's the unity. If people want to be honest, let's grasp the unity. Let's make it the divine. Nothing else can exist but the divine. The Ewe in Ghana call it Sobelisa. The totality of creation is the one. And we're nothing but aspects of that totality. And that's how I began my discussion. When I'm talking about African unity and Pan Africanism, I go like, I'm God having a human experience. Who are you? If you don't know, I'm going to help you get there. You know? But study group is a good way to organize. It doesn't have to be 20 people, 3 people. Reading basic history, reading basic knowledge, getting basic understanding. If everyone would encourage their family to set aside 2 hours a week to hold a study group in your own home, watch a video, read a book, recite some poetry, listen to some music, and discuss it, you'll be surprised how your consciousness will be transformed in a very short period of time, which you already experienced, so you know. I still remember what happened to you in the bookstore in Paris. You know? So you've been through certain transformation. The ancestors reached out and grabbed you. You didn't even know what was happening to you at first.
No.
But you know that all of those things produce a phenomenon that no one else has experienced.
Well, the explanation you gave, I'm sorry, but the explanation you gave about the Pan Africanism and how your DNA comes from so many different places, that really brought it home to me. I really like your explanation. Really made me understand it completely, because that's how it is on my father's side. We have Sierra Leone and Liberia and Cameroon and Morocco, and so it's like, you know, at the end of the day, that's all me. So you know, you have to represent. Yeah, you have to represent just one way.
You are African. All of us. Each one of us is African. And when anything happens at home, when anything happens in the Caribbean, when anything happens in Brazil, Colombia, Central South America, to any of our people, we should feel it in the most deep recesses of ourselves. You know, go to your ancestor shrine, cry a little bit for them. Ask for some guidance on how you can be of some help, even if all I can send is $10, you know, or buy some medical supply from CVS and mail it. That gesture, that act ties you back. Like Dr. Hilliard said, you'll be bound to your identity. And that's the only true freedom you'll have. That's Pan Africanism.
Greetings, Baba.
Greetings.
Yes, how have you been? It's good to see you.
I see you. How you doing?
Not bad.
Here now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to ask, what is your evaluation of I noticed that, you know, be it the census or whatever, you know, like say among a national attitude, that there's a reclassification of race, you know, where they actually have, you know, like mixed as part of a category, you know, in the bureaucracy. And, you know, it seems like that's, you know, that identification, and it's, you know, that's what a lot of our people identify themselves as. Now, in a way, how do you communicate with someone, you know, with respect to the various cultures of the world, but at the same time knowing that the river runs deep? How do you communicate with someone about their Africanness in a in a country and a culture that basically assimilates culture and uses what it wants and discards what it doesn't?
Yeah, it shatters it, it fractures it, it breaks it. And so that's why I keep pushing history, you know, history, because the question is, if I see my brother and sister from Dominican Republic, what is your genesis? Tell me where you come from, okay? I see my brother from Cameroon, tell me where you come from. My brother from Brazil, tell me where you come from, because that's where we'll meet. Because if you tell me where you come from, we're gonna meet in the same place as the same person, you see? Okay. And a lot of times people don't wanna get into the deep discussions, but that's why studying history is important, because many times they just don't know their history. That changing of the census structure, that's the enemy realizing how important identity is. And so he's trying to fracture us at a most significant space and place. And that's why we've got to fight. One of the most beautiful men I knew, he was my father-in-law. His name was Sixto, Mr. Eugenio Tundu. This is a bad dude. White as all get up. You saw Mr. Sixto, you didn't know he wasn't from England or Germany. But tell him he wasn't an African, and somebody would pick you up off the street. And he was a Santeros, okay, on top of it. He was the most African brother I'd ever met, and yet there was nothing aesthetically African about him. because he knew inside of him. He used to say, James, I'm raised by my grandmother from Africa. I married his daughter, his favorite daughter too. So, you know, he was always on top of me, right? So the question is always history. Let's go back to the Genesis. How did you get here? And where did they come from? And you know what'll happen? We'll all end up back in the same space.
All right.
We don't want to go over time in other spaces. I know we've hit that 4 o'clock marker.
We have about 5 more minutes. I have one more question that kind of popped in that I should have got to a little earlier. It says, can our common source be about the principles of Kwanzaa as far as the Pan-African movement goes?
I think, and I'd actually taken out my notes on Kwanzaa. The 7 principles of the Nguzo Saba are universal African principles. You'll find those same 7 principles in the admonition of Ma'at. You'll find those 7 principles in the Obosum of the Akan. You'll find those 7 principles in the Loas of the Voodoo and the Orishas. Those type of principles are universal principles. And Dr. Karanga and the other brothers and sisters working with him that produced that concept, they did it with an intent to deal with an African universality, you know, an African Pan-Africanism, by taking something that was common to all of Africa and creating a phenomenon. Matter of fact, we just put out our advertisement for celebrating Kwanzaa in Ghana this year, you know? And so we said, let's go to Ghana. And since it's so close to Christmas, we said, let's celebrate Christmas, Kwanzaa, and New Year in Ghana.
Oh, that's amazing. They're doing the same thing in East Nigeria. They're having a major Kwanzaa celebration in Eastern Nigeria.
Beautiful.
Around those, 7 principles, because, we don't have to deal with everybody's religion, politics. If we can deal on those 7 principles, that is one way we can come together.
Yeah, very unifying, because all religions contain those 7 principles.
Absolutely.
And Islam is called the 99 Pearls of Faith.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. We got the power. History will give us the way to access that power so that we can use it using the technology of the world today, staying focused on providing food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security for ourselves and our family by getting control of economic, politics, and culture where we live, and then fusing that economic, politics, and culture where we live with the economics, politics, and culture where other brothers and sisters live. Shopping, serving ourselves and our own people. Your culture is your wealth. You see, people buy their culture. They buy their cultural clothing. They buy their cultural food. They buy their cultural writings. Culture is your wealth, because in it is the concept and ideas of unity that no one wants to ever lose.
I agree with you, because at one point, man, it's actually a coincidence you said that we were all one. It all leads to one source, because at one point, we were all one continent at one point. You know what I'm saying? Everybody was all connected.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole land was ours at one
Yeah.
point. So we do have that one connection. You know what I'm saying? That's very important for us to understand.
And Gerardo, sometimes what I tell people is that I know we think we should free Africa, but no, our job is to free the entire planet. Because before there was anybody else, anywhere else in the world, we were all of the indigenes in every corner of this planet, including Europe and Asia, before the ice caused that transformation. So, but if we free Africa and we free the Africans to come together in a Pan-African unity, we will free the world. Because most people don't know, the African world population is larger than the Chinese population, okay? We're the largest population in the world, but they keep us divided. You're Nigerian, you're American, you're Jamaican, but no, the African world population is the largest ethnic racial nation in the world. And then the African wealth pot, when we put in the wealth of the Caribbean, Central South America and the United States, with the wealth of the continent of Africa, we are the wealthiest nation in the world. But only Pan-African unity is going to make that reality a fact.
So, again, this is Mama Nabantu. What is your position on the Pan-African Federalist movement? That's a grassroots movement bringing our people into one continent, mobilizing our people from the grassroots up across the planet.
Any effort anywhere in the world to bring about Pan-Africanism is a good effort. And we should all find a way to fuse and unite around our different efforts towards Pan-Africanism, because that's how we will begin to protect ourselves from genocide in a way what has happened in the last 100 years will never happen to us again.
Ashe.
I think that is something that we can go ahead and close on based on our timing. I would like to thank you for your time again, Baba Small, and all your wisdom.
You the best thing about me. No longer will I let my enemies drive, reroute me. They told me, why did a rider keep a nose who's too close to the fire? But fire brought passion, which is